Hello. I like to do things in Maya which have no real application, no real sense, doesn't make sense. But in this case, you could use this, what I'm talking about in this tutorial, for a chair, for example. This back is quite interesting, don't you think? It's very complex, and it has holes, lots of holes really, and it's a delicate structure really, which you could imagine in any kind of way. You could randomize this so the the parts are not a square, but more distributed. You could even use a file texture which you paint in a 2D application like Photoshop, in order to make a signature right here, for example. Make it transparent only in the parts where the signature is not active, and these kind of things. When we render them in Arnold, there's a sky dome light wrapping around the whole scene. It looks like this, so it looks just alright. If you really insist on modeling a chair, my chair is super simple. Cube, scaled up, duplicated, 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 another cube flattened, a third cube flattened, a few faces extra and deleted, and made a bridge between them, so we have this connection here between the front and the back, this one and that one. Well friends, a brand new scene and a plane. Polygon modeling, a plane. Here it is. Press F in order to see it from a close distance. Here in the attribute editor, which by the way you can reach by pressing Ctrl A, attribute, but it usually sits there anyway. You go to the polygon plane tab here, and this is kind of the factory which makes this thing. What's interesting for us, because we'll use a displacement, and displacement needs a lot of geometry, we raise these values to 200 by 200. So we have a very high resolution. That's fine for now. Next thing, we introduce a new shader, new material. And we use a very simple one, namely a Lambert shader. And here in the attribute editor, you have the Lambert and the shading group. Tap on the shading group and you see this. Back on the Lambert, you see this. You can also use this little icon here in order to go up or down in the hierarchy. What we have here is a surface material called Lambert 2. It's gray. That's the material which sits on that surface. But we don't have a displacement material, and that's what we're going to map now. Let's click here, and we introduce a grid. And what we see is no displacement. However, when we introduce a light, like a sky dome light, and render the scene, we do see a displacement. Quite a massive one. It's so big it fills the whole scene. Actually, let's go back to the displacement here. The displacement has a number here, 1, which doesn't mean anything because this is mapped. It's mapped by the grid. That's, you would reach the grid here. But for us interesting is the scale. And if we reduce that scale from 1 to a smaller value, it depends on the size of your geometry, of course, to 0.1 for example, you get this impression here. And here you see that the white parts are the ones which are not deformed, whereas the black parts are deformed. Of course we want more boxes, and we reach the boxes by, well, let me see. Right here is the place 2D texture. And the critical value here is the repetition in U and V. Let's set it to 12, for example, by 12. And then we have this arrangement, which is quite nice, really. Actually, we can stick to it. We don't see it in the viewport, which is a bit frustrating. And that's why, and this is important now, we go to Arnold and use a very nice tool. Arnold, Utilities, Bake the selected geometry, which means the deformation is baked to an actual new object. So we can work with it all right. So it's not a texture anymore, but it's a real deformation. And when I click on this command here, the current object, the selected object, is not being replaced, but we are asked to save the baked geometry to an object file. That's a .obj file. I did this before, I called it Griddy, and I do this again, and it's done. Now we can hide this object and import the one we just exported, which is the Griddy. And it sits right here, and now it's alright in the viewport and everything is fine. Now let's duplicate it and move it to the side. With the original, we'll now do something. We select the faces, we go to the front or side view, depends on where you see the two objects side by side, and in my case that's the front view. We're in the face selection mode now, and we select the ones down there, all the ones down there. You don't actually see the selection but because the resolution is so high, but the faces are selected and you delete them. So what you have now is this arrangement here, which is already quite interesting. Now let's duplicate this one and move it to the side, and we work on this one. Let us create more geometry, even more. Go to Mesh and smooth that object. So it's smoothed now, and we go to the front window again, and we press the right mouse button and use faces, and now we select the top faces here and we delete them. We have this arrangement now here, which is just cutting off edges from the top. Much more edgy, so to say. And we go back and delete more faces, namely the ones at the very, very bottom. So now we can look through them. And for the third one, press F in order to see it all right. We can, well, actually let's smooth it even further, even more, using 2 subdivisions, maybe. It's done. And now select the faces, and now we can make very sophisticated selections, like these, for example. And delete them. Now we have this structure. It's a layered structure like this. And I would say this is a way to model geometry, which is pretty straightforward. And you can't do this very fast with standard polygon modeling tools. The displacement map is just perfect for this purpose. Have a nice day.